Okay. This is going to be perhaps the most important in this series. At least it was for me today, in preparing for it. Just to quickly review, I've been referring to Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And he makes the argument that there are three possibilities in how to solve the problem of why bad things happen to good people. If God is all powerful, if God is good and treats the righteous in a good way and the wicked in a bad way, and if so-and-so is a good person and he's suffering, one of those must be wrong. And the question is, which one? The Torah, as we have pointed out, focuses on the second statement, that is, that God is good. Moses asks, Hareini nad kevodecha. We went over this last week. God, please show me your glory. The Talmud interprets this to mean, I want to give you kavod. I want to respect you. But I want to give you the respect that comes with understanding. I see how miserable this world can be. The answer is, V'ra'ita t'acharayu ufanai lo yera'u. God tells Moses, you will see my back, but my face you will not see. In other words, what is good and what is bad is not so simple. There are certain things which seem bad at the time, but in retrospect, you can understand. And that's a good answer for many things. I spoke about this last week, and in a lot of areas, we don't open our eyes sufficiently to how true this is. I gave many illustrations, things like someone who lost their job and found out in retrospect, it turned out to be very good because he got a better job. I spoke about the shamus in the shul. It's a classic story, who the rabbi fired because he couldn't sign a ketubah because he didn't know how to write Hebrew. So he wound up making $1 million in real estate. People who didn't have as much money as they wanted to have, when they look back at their lives, perhaps they were better off. People who didn't achieve all their dreams and plans, perhaps they were better off. Who says the ideal existence in this world is to be an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates or an Oprah Winfrey? In retrospect, perhaps you can see things differently. And if it's not in the retrospect of life, perhaps when you see your life fully in Olam Haba, in the world to come after you die, then you could say that a lot of things really weren't so bad. Okay. I would accept this for many areas, but there are two where I think it's insufficient. For you to tell me that you think it's bad, but it's really good or will turn out well, cannot, I believe, be an answer for the areas of death and suffering. And let's see why. How can you say that it will turn out well when a person dies? If a person's life is cut off, then we can't say it was cut off, but it was really good. How can it be good if his life is taken away? Can the song be true when it says only the good die young? Certainly the good die young all too often, as we see in Ukraine these days. Doesn't the Bible teach, I think it's in Psalm 90, the years that God grants us are 70 years. Doesn't make sense to die when you're young. And the second problem that doesn't make sense, even in retrospect, is the problem of suffering. We can deal with the reality of death if it's death with dignity. But the hardest thing to come to grips with is the death preceded by a kind of suffering which is inhuman. Here we must make a distinction between the kinds of things that God is responsible for and those things that God is not responsible for. Sometimes death and suffering is not God's fault. If someone takes a gun and kills someone, he's not necessarily an agent of God doing God's will. But if God doesn't want that person to die, why doesn't he just stop the killer? If God tells us that it's a mitzvah to heal the sick, then God should follow his own advice. If God is the master healer, then why doesn't he intervene and heal the sick? If, however, the illness was not caused by someone else, had MS or cancer or heart disease, depression, then God, why don't you heal them? Tonight we'll discuss the problem of death and next week's suffering. Let's go to a master text from the Talmud, a very, very interesting debate, crucial to our understanding of death and subsequently to suffering. Put it on your screen. Okay, find it. I think this is it. No, this is not it. Okay. Sorry, it's close, but it's not where I was looking. Okay. No, that's not it. Sorry about that. I could be technically challenged. All right, here it is. It's from the tractate of the Talmud called Shabbat. And I'll read it to you. Amar Rav Ami. Rav Ami says, Ein mita below chet ve'ein yisurim below avon. There is no death without sin. Were to a person not to sin, he would not die. That's what's implied. And therefore, there is no suffering without iniquity. And he brings a supporting verse from Ezekiel. Hanefesh hachotet hi tamut. The soul that sins, it shall die. The soul that sins, it shall die. However, this is not a fair proof, this particular verse, because the text really talks about that you can't punish somebody for someone else's sin. The soul that sinned, they shall die. But Rav Ami takes it further that any soul that sins will die. He's saying that death is a result of sin. How did death come to this world? Was it God's plan to have death as being part of this world? Originally, Adam, the first human being, was placed in the Garden of Eden. There were many trees for him to eat from. Two of those trees were significant for the world. The Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the Eitz HaChayim, the tree of life. So God said to Adam, I'll put it on your screen again. This is, all right, we'll just use this. Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al Adam, and God commanded the human, saying, we call Eitz Hagan achol tochel. Of every tree in the garden you are free to eat. Ume Eitz Hadat tov v'ra lo tochel. But for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you shouldn't eat from it. Ki biyom achalcha mimenu mo tamut. For the day, for as soon as you eat it, for the day you eat of it, literally, you shall die. For the day you eat of it, you shall die. So what did Adam end up doing? If you tell a group of children in a room full of toys that they can play with all the wonderful toys in the room, except you see that one wonderful toy in the middle of the room, don't touch it. Where are they going to go first? They're going to go to that toy. They're in the middle of the room. It's like they told us when I grew up and I went to Hebrew school, when we were little kids, if you want to learn Torah, you have to go home and study the Torah. Who did it? No one. One time they said, you know, this next chapter about Tamar, and it actually had to do with her playing the harlot and seducing Judah. When we said that chapter about Tamar, we're not going to read it, we're going to skip it, everybody went home to learn it, to read it. That's human nature. Did you notice a significant point which the commentators make on the verse, of all the trees in the garden you may surely eat, only the tree of knowledge you can't eat? A careful reading indicates that originally man was allowed to eat of the tree of life. And therefore man was intended to live forever. It was only when he sinned that his life was limited. Then the Torah indicates that after his sin, he was punished. And then God forbade him from eating from the tree of life. This means that had Adam not sinned, he would have not known death. What we learn from this is that with Adam's sin, death came to the world. By the way, I must point out that the Torah adds in the next verse that on the day you eat of the fruit, you will die. But Adam did not die on the day he ate, in the actual day. How do we understand this? Some say, since Psalm 90 says that a day in God's sight is like 1,000 years, so God's day is 1,000 years, and we learned about this earlier in earlier classes. Adam died within 1,000 years. I think he lived to be 970 years old or something like that. Others say that Adam died on the day of the week that he ate from the fruit, which was a Friday, on the 6th day of creation. But most people see that when the Torah says that you will die, that on the day you eat of it, you will die, means that on the day you eat of it, you will become mortal, subject to death, not that you will actually die. By the way, and then the Rambam asks, we can understand Adam being subject to death because he committed the crime. But what about everyone else? What about his kids? Why should they die if the original intent was that a human being should live forever? What about everyone else? Why should all the descendants of Adam die? He sinned, we didn't. So how does Christianity deal with this? The Christians, I'm getting a little warm in my office as I'm getting worked up, so I'll just take off my jacket. Christians deal with this with original sin. Original sin, the first sin, the original sin, the sin of Adam eating from the forbidden fruit, is inherited. Since we come from Adam, we inherited the sinfulness of Adam. Christianity can accept the transmission of responsibility for someone else's sin. When I was a little kid walking the streets of Brooklyn, and sometimes I would get beaten up, which wasn't unusual for a Jewish boy growing up in Brooklyn about 60 years ago. That's the dues we sometimes pay for being a Jew. A thug once pounced on me, calling me Christ killer. I was such a little kid. I was so naive. I just said to him, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. The mistake is they think our ancestors killed Jesus, but they didn't do it. The Romans did. Yeah. But even if they did, do they have the right to punish me? Even as Christians may believe they are responsible for what Adam did, Rav Ami cannot accept this in the Talmud. That's what really troubles him. The only explanation for death of future generations, according to Rav Ami, is that everyone has, in one way or another, repeated the sin of Adam by disobeying God's commandments at one time or another. But suppose there was a person who did not commit a sin his entire life. If we follow Rav Ami's logic to the conclusion, this person should live forever. The sages of the Talmud challenge Rav Ami with a midrash, a story which the angels complained to God that Moses and his brother Aaron obeyed every commandment, and they still died. In response, Rav Ami argues that Moses and Aaron were not free of sin, and that's why they died. In the Torah, God says to them, because you did not believe in me and you hit the rock to bring forth water instead of just speaking to the rock as I asked you and I commanded you, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given you. The sages then quote another midrash that asserts that only 4 people in the history of the world died without sin. And they died because God told Adam and Eve that their descendants would not live forever. They were Benjamin, the youngest son of Jacob, Amram, the father of Moses, Jesse, the father of David, and Caleb, the son of David. The conclusion from the lives of these 4 seemed to be, Yesh mita below chet, v'yesh sisurim below oven, v'tiyuvta derav amei tiyuvta. We can deduce from here, the Talmud says, that there is death without sin, and there is suffering without iniquity, and the refutation of Rav Ami is a refutation. In other words, a person can die without committing a sin because everyone dies, even the innocent. The pure and holy are not spared from the universal decree of death. Adam and Eve brought mortality into the world, and it is their legacy and their descendants' legacy that they will be mortal. But have we not said earlier that Judaism rejects the theory of original sin, of original guilt? How do we make sense of it at all? Let me give you a verse from Prophet Ezekiel. Bring it up. Okay, here we go. Okay, Ezekiel 20:18. Here we go. Hanefesh achotei ti tamut. The person who sins, he alone shall die. Ben lo yisaba avon ha'av, va'av lo yisaba avon ha'ben. A child shall not share the burden of the parents' guilt or sins, nor shall a parent share the burden of a child's guilt or sins. The righteousness of the righteous shall be accounted to him alone, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be accounted to him alone. Okay. Where's justice of God when a perfect person dies, a person who's not sinned? The answer is profound in its very simplicity. In a perfect world, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve should have lived forever. But once the world has become corrupt and is no longer a paradise because of the people in it, then everyone must die, even good people. This imperfect world is not good enough for people who are perfect, who haven't sinned. Faultless people now must die in order to be able to enter heaven. And this is why we cannot now have death without sin, not as punishment, or rather as a deserved reward. But wait a minute. Something still doesn't add up. Shouldn't we be asking why, not why good people die, but why should they live in this world? If they don't belong on earth, why are they here at all? To understand the answer, we need to be aware of another basic concept of Judaism. Unlike other religions, Judaism believes that we start off in this world with a pure soul, untainted by the sin of Adam. Unfortunately, everyone commits some transgression and soils the soul. And when it reaches the next dimension after it dies, it must go through a purification process. In other words, the soul must get dry cleaned somehow to bring it back to its original purity. But the obvious question is, why bother with a trip here in the first place? Why live if life in this world is only going to tarnish the soul? Is life in this world really necessary? The answer is a deep mystical principle known in Hebrew as lachmo di kisufa, the bread of shame. I don't know if any of you have heard of this concept, but it's very deep. It refers to bread that is unearned, payment that comes out of pity rather than reward for effort. Perhaps the closest equivalent we have in America is welfare when applied to people who are quite capable of working, but who choose to be on the dole. It's the way of a parasite, and it brings with it shame. Judaism does not look favorably on the concept of a freebie. Judaism says we ought to go to heaven in the old-fashioned way. We should earn it. For Jews, the only way in which the reward of an ideal existence makes sense is if a person works for it. So now it makes sense. We come to earth with a pure soul. Our mission is to maintain its purity as we fulfill our mission in life. This way we can take pride in knowing that we've earned our place in heaven. There's an inspiring story about the revered 18th century Rabbi, the Vilna Gaon, the genius of Vilna, was found crying bitterly on his deathbed. His students couldn't understand. They knew him to be such the most righteous person who would surely go straight to heaven. They studied in the Talmud where it says better is 1 hour in the next world than all the years on earth. So they couldn't understand, why is their Rebbe crying? What is there to cry about if you're leaving this place and going to heaven, they asked him. He said, how can I not cry when I leave this world, in this world where a moment's effort I can still do a mitzvah? He meant, of course, that there is one thing in this world that you cannot get in the other world. In this world, we have a never-ending opportunity for growth. You've heard me speak again and again about what is the real purpose of life. The real purpose of life is not to be happy, but if you ask a parent, they'll say, I just want my kids to be happy. The real purpose of life, though, is to grow a soul. Why did God put your neshama, your holy soul, your eternal soul, into your body with all your talents, with all your deficiencies, born to your parents in the time and place you were born? Because these are the optimal conditions of the growth of your soul. There is little or no possibility for the growth of your soul in the world of the souls. You can't be compassionate in the world of the souls. No one needs your help. You can't resist temptation in the world of the souls. There is no temptation. It's only here in this world where we can grow a soul and stretch ourselves. A fanciful Hasidic tale makes this point very well. There was a very rich man who was miserly all his life, never gave a penny to charity. He died and he went to the next world. And he's standing online waiting to get into heaven. And he sees the people in front of him are being asked, so how much did you give to charity? So when his term comes, he too is asked the same question. He answers, well, to be honest with you, I didn't give much to charity, but I have my checkbook right here in my pocket. I'm prepared to write a check. Doesn't matter what size, I'm very rich, whatever it takes to get into heaven. No problem. But the response comes back, sorry. Up here, we don't take checks. We only take receipts. The point is that once you die, you can no more grow your soul. You need the receipts to get into heaven of the things that you did in this world, the charity you gave, the helping that you gave someone else in need. But questions still remain. Your opportunities for doing good deeds are used up when you leave this world. And that's why the Rebbe was crying on his deathbed. Life is good, even for the perfect person who doesn't need to be here, because it enables us to earn our reward, our place in paradise. But the question that still remains is, Why are some people given less time here on earth than others? That's the question for tonight. And I will try to present you with 7 different approaches. I'm going to begin with the story of Cain and Abel that we all know so well. Who is the first person to die? Abel. Why did Abel die? Because Cain killed him. Cain killed him. Abel was such a good guy. He was a tzaddik. He didn't live long enough to do evil, or they were adults in size, but they were all created really on the 6th day. If one asks, how can you explain his death? The answer is that God didn't take him. Cain did. As we learned previously, there are things that happen on this earth that are not directly the result of God's will. They happen because someone did something wrong. The proof is that God becomes angry at Cain. He didn't want Cain to kill Abel. God says to Cain, Kol demei achicha, so'akim elai min adama, the voice of the blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. In a death unwanted by God, God can only do one thing. He can respond. You may say, well, God could have prevented it. But as we have learned, yes, God theoretically could prevent anything. He could do anything, but at the cost of removing free will. And without free will, we have no real life. And accepting free will, we must understand that some people will die. My first year in Atlanta, there was a congregant who was mugged and killed. I did a funeral for a young man who was killed because an SUV went through a red light. There are instances where we have terrible tragedies because human beings did not act human. The obvious question is, it's not fair. Doesn't the Torah say that God rewards good people and punishes the wicked? The answer is that God will have to make it up to them, but only after the fact. And we'll talk about what that means. God has to make it up to them in a future class. Let's see what tradition says about how God responded to both the sin of Cain and the innocence of Abel. Justice in the aftermath of Abel's murder. What happened to Cain? God punished him. What was his punishment? Well, the Torah tells us, now venati eva aretz. God told him, a wanderer you shall be on the face of the earth. What does that mean? One commentary is so beautiful because it helps us to understand what killing someone really means. When you kill someone, you're removing that person's soul from the body. You're removing the ability of the body to continue to serve as the apartment, the dwelling for his soul. His soul has to wander aimlessly now without a body. Measure for measure. And so Cain became a wanderer because he caused Abel's soul to wander. Another commentary makes Cain's sentence a kind of exile. When one kills another accidentally, the Torah tells us he goes into exile, and the Torah provides Ari Michlat, a special cities of refuge you can go to when you hurt somebody accidentally. So the relatives of the family won't come after you. Some commentators are very sharp in saying that the first murder, Cain killing Abel, had to be accidental because no one ever died before. And Cain couldn't have known that his brother would die from the way he hit him. What about Abel, who suffered an untimely and unfair death? There are 2 ways to solve that problem. One, a simple answer, and one Kabbalistic. The simple answer is that one can earn Olam Haba, the world to come, by being a victim that suffered at the hands of his brother and was immediately given the keys to the kingdom. So if you do something or a victim of something in such a traumatic way, God can just give you the keys to the heaven from that. Or This is what I prefer. Here is the Kabbalistic answer. It's the principle Gilgul Neshamot, transmigration of the soul or reincarnation. Gilgul Neshamot means that anyone whose life was taken in a manner that God did not really want, anyone who should have had more years but didn't, that person must get his divinely decreed opportunity. And therefore, what happens to Abel, he is, forgive me, any Christians who are listening, I don't mean it your way, Abel is reborn. Kabbalah identifies many reincarnations. Do you know who Abel was when he came back the second time? Moses. Do you know who Cain was? Cain ended up being Aaron, Moses' brother. They were given another chance at a brotherly relationship. Whereas Cain asked, am I my brother's keeper? He came back again being Aaron, whose whole life was a support for his brother. In a situation where death is caused by another human being, hence not divinely decreed, but humanly enacted, God has to respond. God has to do something to the one who committed the crime, and God has to do something for the one who was the victim. For the second approach, let me tell you a story from the Talmud. A student was walking with his Rebbe, and he was quite upset with God. By the way, are we allowed to be upset at God? You bet. Abraham was upset at God for destroying Sodom, and he challenged him, Hashofei kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, will the judge of the entire earth not do justly? And he complained to God. We are entitled to be upset with God. The Hasidic master, the Berdichever Rebbe, took God to court. He convened a Jewish court and convicted God. It's saying that so many of our people were suffering so bad. God, how could you let this happen? And things got better after that, actually. We have that all recorded. It actually happened. We should know that when we get to the other world, we will be allowed to go up to God and say to him, God, how could you? And then he will explain and tell us why. So the student said to his Rebbe, I'm very upset. I can't understand how God could let this happen. A friend of his who was a brilliant scholar was young and taken ill, and he died. He was a tzaddik, he was holy, he was righteous. You can't tell me, he said, that he died early because he committed sins. So the Rebbe pointed into the distance and said, look at that terrible thing. And the student said, what terrible thing? See that worker over there? He's carrying his bags and he's going home. It's just a little afternoon and he's already going home. The student said, what's so terrible? I don't understand, Rebbe. The man finished his job and he's going home. Then the Rebbe said, let your own ears hear what your mouth has said. The man finished his job and he's going home. Your friend finished his job in this world, and now he was going home. What was the Rebbe saying? Mission accomplished. Every person is put here on earth for a special reason, a unique mission. Some try to figure out what their mission in life is by looking at their talents that God gave them and trying to use them in this world to better the world. Some feel compelled to do a special mitzvah and get attracted to doing a mitzvah, like saving Jews, like the Jews of Ukraine today, or helping people get married. There's a whole group of Jews who try to help that. We're feeding poor yeshiva students, or even just a mitzvah in a family, taking care of a family member that needs to be taken care of. If you feel that that's your mission and one fulfills a mission, what's left for you to do? I really have known people who have taken care of their parents and devoted half their life to it. And then when the last parent died, they were so lost, experiencing withdrawal, not understanding, well, why should they go on? Because when every day before for half their life, they woke up with a special mission, a purpose in life. When mission is accomplished, your life really is not necessary anymore. So if you feel you've completed your mission, find another mission to do. What I'm saying is that Judaism begins with the premise of Olam Haba as the ultimate destination, the next world. But we don't want the bread of shame, the free bread. We want to earn our place in the next world. The death of the young may be understood with the idea of mission accomplished. Number 3, Abraham died before his time. He died when his twin grandsons, Jacob and Esau, became 13, right before Esau went on to become a teenage hoodlum. Why? To spare him the pain of seeing what Esau would become, so he'd never have to deal with the pain of people asking him about his hoodlum grandson. This is the second concept of dealing with premature death. Well, it's actually the third. It's the second that's non-God related. But the first was mission fulfilled, and the second is to spare a person from seeing what he should not see. I think to myself, all the people who died in 1939 and 1940, the families bewailed them and their death. Oh my God, how could this happen? But these people were spared from seeing suffering or suffering themselves. And you might look at that and say what a blessing it was. Number 4. Number 3 was to spare someone from seeing what he or she should not see. Number 4 is the other side of the coin, to spare someone from the possibility of becoming what he or she should not become. Let me explain with the story of Hanoch. Anybody know who Hanoch was in the Torah? I'm going to put up on the screen. Okay. So, listing all the descendants of Adam through the creation of most of the civilization, it says, "Vayi kol yemei Hanoch." All the days of Hanoch, he listed all the ages of the descendants of Adam. But it told, when it came to Hanoch, it said, "Chamesh v'shishim shana shroshet me'ot shana." That all the days of Hanoch came to 365 years. 365 years. Vayitalech Hanoch et Elohim ve'enenu, and Enoch walked with God, and he was no more. Ki lakach oto Elohim, because God took him. Enoch died far younger than most people of his time. Most people in those days lived to 800 or 900 years. I can't talk tonight about why people lived so long in those days. Either they were closer to the original model of what a human being should be, which would be living long, long years, or perhaps the word years in that context meant something different than they do today. But Enoch's death was premature for his time, at age 365. Instead of the Torah saying, Vayamat, and he died, the Torah says, and Enoch walked with God, ve'einenu, and he was no more, for God took him. All the commentators asked, what does this mean? They answered that God saw that he was so very righteous, but had he lived a little longer, he was in danger of succumbing to the idolatry and evil paganism that began to surround him in his time. God was very fond of Enoch and his good deeds that he had done, and then said, this man I will spare from that challenge. And so we took him before his time to save him, not from seeing something bad, but to save him from becoming something bad. A story. And this leads off with the number 5 reason of why people die prematurely. Rabbi Joshua ben Levi was very angry with God because he saw a tragic death and it disturbed him greatly. He prayed, God, you are good. How can there be a Malach HaMoves, an angel of death that brings such suffering to this world? I wish there would be an end to death. He then had a vision in a dream. In the dream, he battled with the Malach HaMaves, took away his sword, disarmed him. Then he was allowed to see what would happen next. The Malach HaMaves tried to do his job, but he was disarmed and he couldn't. He was impotent. And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi sat back with a big smile. All of a sudden, he heard a big groan that became more and more intense until it became a sob that shook the very foundations of the world. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi then asked God, what is this noise? God answered, the sound you hear is the sound of a world without the angel of death. You think that the angel of death is only an angel of destruction? Understand that the angel of death is also a malach, an angel, harachamim, of mercy. The angel of death is also an angel of mercy. Another reason for death, premature maybe, is that death brings suffering to an end. So why is this suffering in the first place? That's next week's lecture. But for now, we can see at least one thing, that a person who dies is finished with suffering. And in that regard, death can be a blessing. And this is very important. Number 6 reason for premature death. Another story from the Talmud. There was a rabbi who came to another rabbi who was very, very old and asked this old rabbi to give him a bracha, a blessing. The aged rabbi then said to him, may it be God's will that you live to be half my age. You live to be half my age. What kind of blessing is that? Shocked, the younger rabbi asked, why don't you bless me with that I should live your entire lifespan? And the response was, and your children, what should they be? Pastors of sheep? The rabbi who asked for the blessing was the Nasi, the chief rabbi whose children would at some time take over his position. What's the meaning of this response? You should die sometime because there's a time to let the next generation in, for someone else to take over. When we return from a funeral, it's our custom that the mourners eat a hard-boiled egg as a symbol of the circle of life. Some die and some are born. And in order to have the one, you must have the other. So there will be an economy of life, that there be others. This is another answer. And finally, number 7, the 7th answer to why people sometimes die prematurely. It is probably the ultimate answer to the question. In Rabbi Sidney Greenberg's book, A Treasury of Comfort, he quotes a man, Robert Baxter, I don't know who he is, who was asked on his deathbed, how are you feeling? That's a strange question to ask someone who's dying, isn't it, on their deathbed? How are you feeling? His reply in 2 words was so profound. He said to how are you feeling? He said, almost well. Listen, how are you feeling? You're dying? Almost well. Think about that. It's beautiful. Almost well, because soon I will pass and I will be well. I'm almost well. If you ask me, Rabbi, how can we honestly believe in Olam Haba, in our modern world, in the next world that is a world of the soul, that there is life beyond death? How can we believe that? I would answer by telling you one final story written by Y.M. Tukhachevsky, and I think it was based upon a midrash, and it's found in Rabbi Mar Slam's book, The Jewish Way of Death and Dying, towards the back of the book. It's a story I've shared with you before, but it's so profound. I don't mind sharing it again and again. Let me read it to you. There was once twins in the womb of a mother about to be born. Imagine that they had consciousness and they're aware of the circumstances as much as they could hear, see, and feel. Imagine they could talk to each other and communicate and have a conversation. Now, one was an optimist in the story, and the other twin in the womb was a pessimist. Okay, I'll continue reading. The pessimist says, it looks like the end is coming for us because I can feel movement and we probably be expelled from this world we're in now. I don't see how we can possibly survive. The other twin responds, stop being a pessimist. There has to be a reason we were here for all these 9 months. It would be absurd for us to be here all this time just to go to extinction. The pessimist says, sure, you and your religion, you're a fanatic. You're probably an Orthodox Jew, I would say. You're an optimist, but we are doomed. The optimistic brother responds, I just have a feeling, a belief that there is a reason, a purpose that we will go on. The pessimist says, all right, if you're so smart, tell me how we can continue to exist. Here we are surrounded by this water all around, connected with a tube of life that sustains us. Obviously, without all this, we will die. Can you describe life out of the confines of this palace that we live in? The womb? Impossible. The optimist responds, I don't know how, but I do know that it will be. Suddenly, the mother goes into labor. And as fate would have it, the optimist is expelled first. The pessimist inside is most anxious to hear what's going on the other side and strains very closely to the walls of the womb and hears from the outside crying and screaming. He says, too bad for my brother. I guess I was right after all. Poor boy, he is gone. While on the other side, at the very same moment, happy mother and father are wishing each other mazel tov at the birth of a new child who has gone from one kind of existence to another. While the other kind of existence, no one will be able to describe, predict, or imagine the other. This story is used to try to convey in some small way the concept of two kinds of existence. Even as pre-birth fetal child could not possibly imagine life on this earth, so too we human beings cannot describe, fully understand life beyond this world. When we ask about the tragedy of death, is it not beautiful to consider that when our story is finished here on earth and we hear the cry and the scream as we leave this world, someone in the world to come is saying, Mazel Tov, welcome home. Glad to have you back. I just want to add one little insight as a final summary from the creation story. It's interesting that in the beginning of the Torah, at the end of every day, God looked at everything he created and he said, Ki tov, it was good. When God finished all of creation, the Torah says, Vayar Elokim et kol asher asa. When God saw everything he created, he said, V'hinei tov, it was good. Ma'od, very good. It was not only good, it was very good. So the Talmud asks, what does it mean, very good, as opposed to just good? The Talmud answers, Tov ma'od zu hamavet. Very good refers to death. Only when God saw death and he said, Tov ma'od, it was very good. Only when he saw death, he said, Tov ma'od, it was very good. Because life is incomplete without death. The Indian poet Tagore defines death, and listen to this quote. Death is, he wrote, putting out the lamp, for the dawn has come. Putting out the lamp, for the dawn has come. Questions? You'll have to unmute yourself in order to do it.
So, Rabbi,
Yes, Levi. I hear you, but I'm saying, oh yeah, here you go.
okay. So, creation, good and evil, along with life and death, was created at the same time. Doing creation.
Yes, yes. Everything that lives dies.
Okay, so
And so that everything was created that way, except, according to this approach, except if you look in the Torah, God does not forbid Adam from eating from the tree of life until after he sinned.
okay,
Anytime he could have eaten from that tree of life and he would have been immortal, say the sages. So Adam wasn't created in a way where he would be mortal. Not yet. That changed after his sin. Although you could take another approach to this. Remember, I use the understanding. You take a group of kids and you put them in a room with all wonderful toys, and you say that one toy in the center, don't touch it. That's the first they're going to go to. So you could say that when God said you can eat from any tree in the garden, but you see that wonderful tree in the middle, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, don't eat it. He was setting them up. You could take this approach, and some rabbis do. He was setting them up. He knew that man would sin because it was in his nature to be curious.
okay.
So much so he would sin. So I would take the approach that yes, that death was built into creation, even of Adam. So follow up your question.
Well, thinking about Adam, let's look at it from a point of view as if Adam did not eat from the tree, but yet death is a part of creation. So that means that Adam would not have had any idea of death, period. Even though things around him would die, but he still wasn't able to recognize death as death. So
That a human being could actually die. And you could take that approach, and many of our sages did, and I tried to present that. I'm just saying there's another way of looking at it.
oh, okay.
That God knew that Adam would sin because he created him with that kind of curiosity. And so in order to, remember I say, what's the purpose of this world? This purpose of this world is to grow a soul. And the only way you can grow a soul is if you're provided with challenges again and again, different kinds of challenges in this world. And you have to grow through those challenges. And some of those challenges would draw you to sin and other things. And so that in itself, if that's your nature, if that's the nature of a human being, which I think it is, then God knew that Adam would eventually sin and then become mortal.
I see.
That's my approach. So I'm saying there's two approaches. I'm not saying which one is correct, but that's my approach.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Rabbi,
Yes, Dave.
can a man take his own life without sin? Did you hear that?
I heard the question. I'm reluctant to answer it because the answer is no, but. No, but.
But what?
It all depends on the circumstances. There's a lot. I'll give you an extreme circumstance. Now, let's say somebody is in the last stages of their lives in terms of the doctors say he has less than 6 months to live. He's qualified for hospice, and he's in a lot of pain. The only thing that will alleviate that pain, let's say, is morphine. But if he takes morphine, it may restrict his breathing and then quicken and hasten his death. Would that be permitted? And the answer is yes.
What about the martyrs who died on Masada?
For the sanctification of God's name. They didn't kill, well, they killed themselves. Right, they killed themselves so that they wouldn't be taken and displayed all over the Roman empires as a way of embarrassing the Jewish people and God. So I would say yes, and also I would add to that there are plenty of stories even from the Holocaust of Jewish girls who took their own lives rather than be whores for Nazi officers. So I'm saying it all depends on the circumstances. Anybody else?
Hello, Rabbi, it's Sherry.
Sherry, wow.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I thought the 7 concepts were very interesting and I've never heard them, really, I never heard all of them before and I never heard them explained in that way, but it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that was very insightful because I haven't heard them like that with regard to death.
If you want to hear more or have it down, here's an amazing book by my teacher, Rabbi Benjamin Blech. If God is good, why is the world so bad?
Mm.
He takes on Harold Kushner and really defeats him. And much of the Torah I'm sharing with you, I learned from him.
Okay.
And so if you want to see more of that, Blech, B-L-E-C-H, Benjamin Blech.
Okay.
He's all over Amazon, and you can see his videos on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, it's 8 o'clock, 8:01. Services Friday night will be still at 6:30, and then the following week we move to 7 o'clock. Next week we will have the last class in the series, not really, because on Shavuot night, on Saturday night, on the first night of Shavuot, we'll be having a dinner in the synagogue and having 2 more of those classes. So everybody have a good evening and thank you for coming. And we'll see you shortly. Services Friday night at 6:30 and Saturday morning at 9:30.
Thank you.
God bless.
Big Kiddush on Saturday.
Oh yeah, big Kiddush, Dave's birthday, special birthday. Dave's
88.
special birthday. It reads the same from front and back, like 44, but not quite. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.